Welcome to Chicago Autism Network's virtual parent workshop. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families find and afford effective autism therapy and supports. Tonight, we are privileged to hear from Dr. Kelly Canavan. Dr. Canavan is a pediatric speech language pathologist and head of the speech language department at IS Landing. She recently received her doctorate in speech language pathology from Northwestern University after defending her research on AAC. So we are very fortunate to have her with us tonight. And I'll turn the time over to Kelly.
There we go. Okay, can everyone see the title slide of the PowerPoint? Yes, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so as Kimmy had mentioned, we're going to be talking about about incorporating AAC, and really this is stemming off of from the talk that was done 2 weeks ago that was talking about just the basics of AAC and what's involved in AAC. And so now we're going to talk about incorporating this into daily routines, because sometimes can be a really big struggle for a lot of families, as well as for therapists. And so the objectives, what I hope that you walk away from with this course is that you have enough information on AAC. We're going to review some of the basics in case you had missed the first one. We're going to talk about a little bit about the impact of high-tech devices on verbal speech, as well as modeling AAC and how to go about that. We're then going to talk about implementation of AAC across environments as well. Little disclosure statement. So as Kimmy had mentioned, I am a full-time speech language pathologist. I do work for IS Landing, and there's no relevant financial interest or arrangement or affiliation with Chicago Autism Network. I'm just so happy to have the platform to be able to provide you guys with the knowledge and education to then be empowered for using these AAC devices. There are some videos within this presentation that provide 4 examples of how to model and how to use the devices. The family of the participants in the videos have provided their informed consent for this presentation only. So a little bit about me. Kimmy had already provided my introduction, but I am also early intervention certified. I do hold my license in the state of Illinois, and I did just defend my doctorate, my research on the effects of verbal speech and speech generating devices. So I specifically was looking at the effects that speech generating devices have on verbal speech, because I have so many of my kids who have benefited from these speech generating devices or high-tech devices and have started to verbalize and have started to speak. And there's so much of a stigma against when you do provide a high-tech device. Parents will sometimes feel as though that you're giving up on verbal speech, and that is just not the case. And so I want to be able to provide that education for you guys. My favorite piece of advice for parents, and this is something that I really loved about doing the communication building workshop back in September, and I'm gonna love even more about doing this one, is that you cannot be afraid to have fun. So our kids are meant to be kids. They're meant to learn how to play. They are learning from their environments. And so we have to sometimes show them how to play and to not be afraid to get on the floor or to be silly or have fun. And the same goes for when you're using even a high tech or an expensive piece of equipment as well. So we're going to review a little bit, because I want you guys to be empowered when we're going through this and to know the difference between these different areas. So when we talk about speech, we're actually talking about a verbal means of communicating. We are talking about the air going through from your lungs, through your vocal folds, coming out of your mouth and being shaped by your tongue, your lips, your teeth, in being able to produce the speech that we're creating. Now, when we're talking about language, this is something that's very specific and is something that is socially shared code for representing concepts. And so you're talking about expressive language, which is being able to express yourself. That can be through gestures, that can be through sign, it can be through written language, it can be any means where you are expressing yourselves. And then there's a language comprehension piece. And what that is you are comprehending everything that's going on. You're picking up on somebody else's gestures. You're picking up on reading from a document. You're understanding that language that's happening. And so a lot of the times is that people will combine the two and think of, okay, well, language is just what I'm understanding and speech is what I'm able to express. And really there's so much more to that. And then communication is something that involves understanding as well as expression, and it has to be shared between two people. So you have to have a sender and a receiver in order to be able to effectively communicate. So when building communication, we are thinking about and wanting to keep in mind that language learning and use are determined by the interaction of biological, cognitive, psychosocial, and environmental factors. Everything that we are doing around us is affecting the way that we are communicating, and it's going to evolve. Communication and language are always evolving. I've given the example 2 weeks ago where, communicating through emojis was never a thing 10, 15, 20 years ago. And now it's something that we're using within our therapy sessions. We have to teach our kids what different emojis mean. So then that way they're able to understand and comprehend what someone else says, and then be able to express the same thing as well. Our language is consistently changing depending on what's going on around us. And so effective use of language for communication requires, again, the understanding of human interaction, you're understanding or you're picking up on nonverbal cues, you're motivated and you're wanting to communicate, and then also thinking about the roles that you play within your community. So now AAC. What does AAC mean? So AAC actually stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication, and this is a method of functional and effective communication that involves supplementing or replacing natural speech with written or with writing or aided symbols, or even unaided symbols. And so there are many different reasons for why we use AAC, but the main purpose for why we're using it and for why we're using the different types is that so our children, our fellow peers, anybody is able to communicate effectively and to express their wants and needs in a spontaneous fashion, in a novel fashion, with an utterance, and they're able to then generate that and they're able to put their message out there. We very rarely use the same words in the same sequence all of the time. And so the reason that we're using AAC is so then that way we can teach the different language pieces, we can teach the different units, and then that child or that AAC user is able to combine those and to communicate as fluidly as we do as well. So communication should always extend beyond conveying the basic wants and needs. And a lot of the times in those first years of using AAC, in those first years of communication, we're doing a lot of requesting. And the reason that we're doing a lot of requesting is because we're getting our needs met and we're requesting something that's very rewarding. If I say I want a cookie and I get a cookie, I'm going to ask and say that again. And so that is something that is really, driving our motivation to want to communicate. AAC users, they should be able to produce words, they should be able to produce phrases and produce sentences. Again, reminding that our sole purpose is to be snug, is to provide spontaneous and novel utterances and not have something that's pre-programmed already for us. So there's different types of AAC devices. We have talked a little bit about high-tech devices at the very beginning, and high-tech, they are going to have our pre-stored messages and they are going to have our pre-stored verbal output. So if I open up a device, I open up a language system and I push the button more, it's going to spontaneously say more. It's not waiting for me to make a recording for it. Whereas your mid-tech devices, those are things that you're going to see, like your Big Mac switches or a GoTalk device, a communication builder. That is where you are actually programming the page and then you're pushing on the button and you are recording your voice or you're recording someone else's voice to then be able to, when the user is pushing on that button, it's going to produce someone else's voice, but it's not coming pre-stored. A low-tech device, you'll see that in a few of the videos here. And that has zero speech output. What it is, it's a piece of paper and it has either pictures on it or words on it, or it's your PEX book. It's a touch chat paper book where you are just pointing to it and you're able to communicate that through a visual sense. You then have the person who is receiving the message able to interpret it. They might provide you with a verbal model so that then you can imitate. And then the last one is unaided systems or no tech. And so this includes any gestures, body language, facial expressions, and as well as sign. So it was a little fast, but I want to make sure everyone has kind of the basics of what AAC is and are able to understand it so that way when we do go through and talk about modeling AAC, you have a solid understanding of everything going on. So when should AAC be considered? This is a question that comes up a lot, and something to really keep in mind is that when a child's speech output is not adequate to communicate. I hear a lot of times from parents, I've been asked in courses like this before, is how early is too early? And I would say if they are starting to try and communicate and it's not something that's effective and they're relying on somebody to interpret their message or interpret their need, start AAC. You don't have to start all the way at the very tippy top and using the high tech and expensive devices, but start to do some kind of visual support or gestural support, or providing them with some means to support their language growth. Remember, we're thinking of language growth and speech growth as two separate units. If a child is frustrated very easily, if they're having limited access to their home and community environment, if their independence in developmentally appropriate daily activities is being impacted because they are unable to communicate or unable to communicate effectively, if they have difficulty with accessing school curriculum, participation in classroom activities, or just the ability to interact appropriately with family and peers, these are all things of when AAC should be considered. And so from there, okay, you're considering AAC. And so now you have this great device, or you have this wonderful visual and all of the support, and it's sitting at the top of your kitchen table and it's not accessible to anybody. That's not necessarily going to be supportive. And so looking at accessibility, this is the first thing that I do when I go into a child's home, or I'm working with a family, or I'm working with someone who uses AAC, is I'm asking them, okay, how can they have access to their device? Where does the device live? And so you want to design a good experience for the child, and you want to make sure that the child or the AAC user is understanding that this is an extension for them. This is their communication system. So if yes, I might be able to sign and mom understands what I mean, or verbalize and mom understands what I mean, but now a caregiver's in here and I'm doing the same thing and they don't understand, okay, I'm going to go and find my device and I'm going to be able to effectively communicate with them and then get my needs met. So they need to be able to have that accountability with the device. And you want to make sure that the device is always, or the communication system is always within the child's visual field. And so, like I said, this is usually the first step. It's great when I'm working with BCBAs and a behavior therapy team, because they are so great with discrete trials and they're able to they have a lot of hours with the child and they're able to work on this skill and get them to be carrying their device around and have it become an extension for themselves. So then from there, types of vocabulary. So we've talked about the types of AAC, what AAC is, types of AAC. We've talked about how to keep AAC accessible. And now, okay, you have your device with all the pretty vocabulary words. You have your pretty vocabulary board in front of you. What does all of this mean? You have your speech therapist that's talking about core vocabulary, or you might be doing PECs, and so you're hearing more fringe vocabulary. What is the meaning behind all of this? And so what core vocabulary is the words that are most frequently used by a child or by a user in a variety of contexts. And so this is your verbs, adjectives, pronouns, adverbs. These are words that are going to be able to be used and applied in any setting that you're in. Now, fringe vocabulary, this is something that's more specific. This is Sesame Street. This is Elmo. This is Peppa Pig. This is swing. These are things that typically are going to be the most motivating for our kids, and kind of where we start off with some of our kids or AAC users when introducing a device, but that's because that's what they're motivated by. And then it's our job to make sure that we're incorporating core and fringe together. And so typically it's a high percentage of nouns. It's used in specific contexts, so it's not being able to be used across the board. And then it's used in a small portion of just different environments. So I had given, this is typically a hands-on course. This will be towards the end, is where I'll ask you guys to kind of come out and start chatting, giving me answers for different things. In the workshop 2 weeks ago, I did something a little bit mean where we created our own core board. And I said, okay, we're getting ready. And I think we were going out to a restaurant, which was super exciting because of COVID. And everyone was putting different items on there. And then I switched the slide and I said, wait, but first we have to go to the bank. You have to use this board to be able to go to the bank. And it was hard. There were some phrases that we were able to do, but we weren't able to meet all of our needs. And so that's something to keep in mind. A lot of the times I will see therapists get very focused, or I'll see families get really focused on creating these perfect pages for their kids that are based off of what they're motivated by. But what's challenging is that it's not able to be generalized for the next environment or be able to be generalized outside of that. And so this is why talking about vocabulary is really important when talking about building communication. Also, there's a lot of colors. The colors are meaningful. And sometimes those colors might change. This is where you want to make sure that you are talking with your team and you're talking with your speech therapist, you're talking if you have a vision specialist because there's some kind of vision impairment, and you're making sure it's consistent. For the most part, for all of the devices, especially the high-tech devices, you are going to have a color coding system that is following the Fitzgerald key. What this means is that yellow is going to show any kind of pronoun. It's going to talk to you about the who within or the subjects. Then the green is going to talk about your verbs and your action words. You're going to have the orange that is talking sometimes about your nouns or your objects of sentences. Purple are going to be places. It'll change a little bit, but the reason that it's important is because when you are adding words to a device, you want to make sure that you are maintaining that consistency. You don't want to have some words just be a different color because that's kind of what you felt like going along with. The reason being is that right now it might not seem as important because you're modeling single words, but when you start to do build sentences, then you're able to show them a visual of like, you need a yellow square and you need a green square, and then we're ending with punctuation. And so what the child is then able to do is create a novel utterance, which is something that's really important. So some common misconceptions, they're out there. I know they're out there. I love to hear them from families and therapists and see what are they thinking about AAC. And I'll ask people, and there's no offense taken whatsoever when people are like, I don't want to use that because that's going to, impede their verbal speech, or that's something that's more screen time for them. That's a lot of the things that we'll hear too. And the thing is to find out why. Why are you having these misconceptions? Where are you getting this information from? And then let's see how we can work around it. A lot of misconceptions is that a child must understand cause and effect, and this is not true. And especially this comes with age, is that you can teach cause and effect with using a device. If I push cookie and you give me a cookie, I'm going to start to understand that every time I push cookie, there's an effect that's happening. I'm being given something. One of my kids, when he was using the device for a little while, and then it clicked, and he went to a snack page and he clicked cupcake, and he looked at the therapist. He was like, you're going to make the cupcake appear because I just pushed this, and this is what this means. We then had to teach that that's not always what we're getting, but it was something that was really interesting to watch that cause and effect really click and start working for him. A child must understand that a picture represents an object. That is not the case. There are some words and there are some programs that either have multi-meaning pictures, which means that a picture of a can also represents the can of when you ask a question of, can I do this? It also represents drink. It also represents all of these other things. And so that means that that single picture doesn't only represent that single thing. And when you're teaching cause and effect, you are teaching them that, okay, a picture isn't what is representing or what is something that they're learning. They're learning more that when I select this item or when I select this button, I'm getting a result from that. Adequate motor skills, again, that doesn't need to be a necessity when teaching AAC. When you're starting to introduce AAC, you want to make sure that you are working with a specialist who will help you and help your child or help the AAC user gain the best access. That is what our job is. There are key guards, there are buttons, there are switches, there are so many different things. There's visual scanners, there are head pointers, so many different things that are available out there. And so you do not need the adequate motor skills to be able to use AAC. Child must understand enough language for AAC use. We expect our kids to be talking after 12 months or to be using their first words. And there's a reason why we're expecting them at 12 months to use their first word and not when they're first born. And it's because they need a year of learning about the world that's around them, learning about the language that's around them, watching us, and then they're going to start to experiment with that. The same thing is happens with AAC users, and I see this a lot when we have especially when we have a high-tech device that has a lot of words available on it, and then we give it to the child and we're like, you should have 5 words by next week. And that's just not the way that we learn language. It is something that's completely different. And so that's very common, something that therapists fall into and families fall into, is we need to look to see how is their language growing? How are they understanding what the language is on the device as well as what the language is that's around them. And then child must be interested in communicating. If you are introducing an AAC device and this child hasn't necessarily been able to have their needs adequately met, or has been able to have their needs met maybe by gesturing, but not necessarily effective with all adults, and now you're giving them a device, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be interested in communicating or using that device. And that device could actually increase behaviors for a minute. It has to be then incorporated properly. It has to be modeled by the family. It has to be modeled by the therapists that are using it to show the child that this is a communication tool. This is something that you can start to use, and you can start to use language that's around you. Okay, so will an AAC device have a negative impact on my child's verbal speech? And the answer to that is no. From the research that I had done for my doctorate, I looked at a large number of studies and narrowed it down for the criteria. I was looking for children that were, it's ended up being just with children, but I was looking for AAC users who were using a high-tech device. So we're using something that provided a speech output. And then I was looking for just specifically for verbal speech. So studies that were analyzing that, and there were not a lot. There were only 13, which I was shocked, but also kind of expected, because I feel like when there are a lot of studies that are looking at verbal speech, they're looking at other things as well. And they're also measuring it from different standpoints. So all of the studies determined that the use of a speech sharing device had a positive impact on that child's verbal speech. And one of the studies actually reported that the child increased their intelligibility by 38.6%. And so the way that we look at intelligibility, if you're not familiar with that, is that I will have a child come in, I'll do a language sample, and I'll say, okay, about how many words did I understand from the 10? If I understand 2 from the 10, then that means that they have 20% intelligibility. If I understand 8 from the 10, okay, there's about 80%. I'm going to understand 80% of what they're talking about. And so the fact that they grew from, I believe they started at a point, like a 4.8, I'm not entirely sure, but then they grew all the way, there would have been a 2, because they grew all the way to a 40% intelligibility just from implementing a device. They were already receiving therapy. They were already getting all of the tools that they needed, but now they had this device that could model for them consistently and model for them on demand. That was huge, and that increased their intelligibility. The below studies and the studies that are in this chart show that there was a percentage of increased total verbalized words. So they started to increase the number of words that they were actually verbalizing since beginning the study and prior to a speech sharing device being implemented. So this is where you start to come in a little bit. So I want to hear from you guys. How many people can run 2 feet? How many of you think that you would be able to run 2 feet? Nobody? Awesome. Yeah, I tried to pick a small number. I was like, what could we do that would Makes sense. And so, okay, run 2 feet. I am confident that I think most of you could. What about 140,000 feet? It's a little bit of a bigger number. It is the equivalent of a marathon. So the reason that I ask, and I provided an example when talking about building communication just through daily routines in September, was how many people could tie their shoes, and then how many people think that they could tie a mega yacht to a dock. And so what the emphasis or the point that I'm trying to make is that we all have this zone of proximal development. We all know what we can do. And then we know that there's a little bit beyond that we're learning, we're trying to experience. And so this is the distance between an individual's actual development and then the level of their potential development. And then there's this level that's completely beyond, right? You would have to, in order to transition from running 2 feet to 140,000 feet approximately, you'd have to train for that. No one's going to say, okay, you can do this, so you can definitely do that. You have to train and you have to build and you have to be able to scaffold those different skills. And so that's the same thing of what we're doing when we're trying to incorporate the AAC devices, when we're trying to build on a child's language skills, is that we are building off of what they can do and we're providing a little bit of support to see, okay, how are they growing? And so this is typically determined by problem solving from the caregiver or from the adult. And this is how our learning is occurring. How many of you have seen your kids just kind of shut down if something becomes too overwhelming, or you shut down if something becomes too overwhelming? It's because that's reached beyond your zone of proximal development. You're not able to comprehend that far. So therefore you're just going, nope, I'm not going to do it at all. That's something that we want to be mindful of and that you can talk to with your team. And so here's a nice visual of what can the learner do unaided, or what can they do independently? And then what can the learner do with guidance? If I provide you with a model, if I am showing you how to do this consistently, are you able to do it? If I give you that support, that verbal feedback, that encouragement, can you do it? And then the outside circle is represents what the learner is not able to do. So even if I provide you with all of the support, even if I give you all of the Gatorade and all of the chews that are absolutely possible, no matter what, you cannot go from running 2 feet to 140,000 feet, because it's just something that our bodies aren't meant to do just spontaneously. And so it's something to keep in mind too when we're talking about communication. So why is this important? Why is it important for you guys to know? Why are you here? This is the reason, is that you are with your kids, you are with your AAC users the most per week. You are the ones that we are relying on to provide those models to help them build that communication, because it's not something that we can do 30 minutes a week, 60 minutes a week, depending on what your model is with an SLP or what your model is with going in with a school system. You are the ones that are providing them with that education. And so you are the ones that should feel empowered and should feel as though that you can be those advocates for your kids and be able to be a part of this system. And so that's very important. So how to build communication using AAC. This is all the fun stuff. So the research suggests, and the most supported form is aided language stimulation. What this means is that the communication partner is highlighting symbols on the AAC system as they interact verbally with the child using AAC with a goal to teach language. It goes under other names such as modeling or augmented language or partner augmented language. What it means is that if I am using spoken language, so I am just speaking to an AAC user or to someone who signs, and then they are somebody who uses ASL or who uses AAC, I'm not going, they're going to be this unhappy child that's to the right of it. They're not going to be able to understand that, okay, the sign for more means more if I'm just looking at them and saying more. I have to provide them with that aided language input. I have to show them this is more. I can still verbally say it, but I have to show them the sign for it, and then be able for them to grasp on that and to grasp, okay, this is the type of communication I'm going to use. I'm going to sign for more. May not be able to say it, but I know that when you say more and you sign more at the same time, you're getting more of something. I'm going to do the same thing. So this is why we want to model for our kids. And modeling can look like many different things. These are a lot of different pictures in terms of our word power systems. If anyone's familiar with NovaChat or Saltillo products, these are the NovaChat vocabulary off of word power. And so when you're modeling, you are focusing on core words, or you can focus on main words, fringe words. Remember, those are our high nouns, depending on what our kids are motivated by. And there's no need for grammatically correct sentences. I might still speak in a sentence to a child, but I might only be modeling one word. So let's open, okay, and I am pushing open every single time. And you'll see that through videos. This isn't something that anybody needs to feel like I need to be entirely proficient on this device to be able to speak in sentences and only speak this way for me to be able to teach it to somebody. You are learning with your child together. You, as a therapist, are learning with the child together as well. And it's okay if you make mistakes. It's okay if you hit the wrong button. Show them that. Show them how are you reacting. Oh man, I tripped over my words, or oh, I didn't mean to hit that, and then hit the right one. It's showing them that that's okay. We forget words, we stumble over a word sometimes. And so it's all depending on how we're reacting. And again, we're modeling that reaction for them to then imitate when they're not understanding. So typically in the beginning, talking about modeling maybe 1 to 2 words during the activity. So then that way you feel confident in incorporating the words within the activity and in building that communication. And then repetition is going to be a key factor. You want to create a lot of repetitive experiences. So then that way they are going to be watching, and then they are given the opportunity to request or comment or, use the thing that you're modeling as well. So this is a video of a little girl, and we are working with a low-tech communication board, and we are modeling on what we're putting on her shoes and braces. And so I'm going to try this. I got feedback the last time that it was a little jumpy. The videos weren't adding up or weren't synchronous. So I'm trying this. We'll see. So let me know if this works.
Ready? Let's put our socks on, socks on, socks. On. Put our socks on, put them on our feet. Up, up, up. Up, up, up. Socks on. Wait. Let's put our braces on, braces on. Good girl, braces on. Let's put our braces on. Nope.
And then she proceeds to go towards my mask and pull that off in times of COVID. So from that, you see I'm singing during it, I'm pointing to it. There's a lot of repetition because we've chosen when we're putting our socks on, our braces on, and our shoes on, we are just modeling the word on, and she starts to pick it up. I'm not instructing her to go and hit on. I'm not telling her to go and do that. I'm just making it part of our natural routine. This is another example of a way to work on that repetitive behavior. This is obviously from a virtual format. So looking at what can we do when we're not necessarily in person. And this is something that's motivating. I have eat to be highlighted for one of my friends. And so then we're going to feed SpongeBob the piece of popcorn that goes in. And then I can model bigger or get big. And I have the longer phrase, but we're working on him just using big. And so then the fun thing is that once we say get big, SpongeBob is going to get that cause and effect, and he is going to get bigger. We have the repetition and all the way up for SpongeBob to then get really big and grow off the screen, and it's giving this reaction. I'm able to model and provide the family with the pathway that I want to use for modeling while also being in a separate location. Because sometimes it can be harder when we're modeling on the device and I want them to be seeing me, I want them to be engaging. So this is a nice example of that. If any of you are familiar with the Hannon program, Hannon talks a lot about communication building across all types of disabilities and across all types of abilities with kids in terms of building their communication. The biggest thing for this is their OWL system. So what OWL stands for is observe, wait, and listen. We are doing the same thing with when we're teaching kids verbal communication. We should be doing the same thing when we're teaching kids using AAC. You notice from me with pointing to on, I started to maybe point to it, but I wasn't vocalizing it. I wasn't pointing it fully, and I was waiting. I was seeing if she was going to respond and giving her that space. So then that way, is she able to kind of go back to it? Is she able to respond? And giving her the chance to do that is really important. So a lot of the times I get this from families or I get this from therapists. I want to try AAC, but they're not motivated by anything. And I don't know what to do to be able to start initiating that, or to get them to pay attention to me pushing a button, or to me modeling something or pointing to something. And so a lot of the thing, what my response to that therapist or to the family is to take an inventory of their motivators. What is something that they are playing with? Watch them, observe what they're doing, and wait to see, are they maybe playing with beads? Are they playing with lights? Are they fascinated by music? Are they listening, watching videos? You want to watch how the child's interacting with the item, and then use the different things that are around them. So you are getting creative, you're following their lead. Don't be afraid to get on the floor. Don't be afraid to be silly. You are supposed to be the most exciting thing on within the room and for your child. And sometimes that's hard, especially when we're battling with maybe the attention from the iPad or we're through a computer screen. But you trust me, it can happen and you can do it. But sometimes you've just got to go with the flow and be absolutely ridiculous to be able to get the child's attention, but they're going to be motivated by it because they're going to want it again, or they're going to want the lights to go off again. And so based off of what their response is, then you can start to scaffold. Obviously, if you try something and they're not responding to it, then it's time to try something new. So an example that I have here is one of my tougher kids that I had at the very beginning was not necessarily motivated by any of the toys, was really learning about cause and effect, and was very fascinated by lights. So I said, okay, lights, how can I work lights into using AAC? We're not necessarily functional with any of our communication. Okay, what do we do with lights? Well, the lights can be bright. Okay, we can turn the lights on and we can turn the lights off. And this is, we're gonna start here. And so I would just hit on and I would turn the lights on. They would get that visual input. They would be excited. They would see the lights. We can turn the lights on from overhead. We can turn the lights on of a spinning toy. And then we would turn the lights off. And all of a sudden the input's completely removed. And they're going to want that back because that was something that was enjoyable. So now, okay, I'm going to model and I'm going to turn them on again. And so as they're starting to respond and they are starting to become more motivated, they're paying attention or watching me with what I'm pushing or what I am selecting and modeling. Now I might add turn into there. And so now I've got 3 words and 3 vocabulary words that I can use into any daily activity, but I'm starting to incorporate that into something that they're motivated by. So here's my first challenge for you guys. And I saw that there are a few things in the chat. I saw that there are a few things in the chat, but what I want to do first is I want to think of an activity, or someone give me an activity that you find would be challenging, or you would like to come up with 3 words that we can use for the use on an AAC device. I'll pull the chat up. Oh no. I just saw the chat about the video. Oh, that makes me sad. Okay, what we'll do is we will skip this activity and we will go back to that video because I do think that it's beneficial to see that. I apologize for that. See, I tried something different and then it did not work. Okay.
Ready? Let's put
Thanks, Kimmy.
Put our socks on, socks on, socks on. Put our socks on, put them on our feet. Up, up, up. Up, up, up. Socks on. Ooh, wait. Let's put our braces on. Braces on. Good girl. Braces on. Let's put our braces on. Nope.
Okay. Now that must make a lot more sense to you guys. And you heard the things that I was saying. So hopefully you're able to reflect more on that. I'm going to skip through SpongeBob. And we're back to our motivators, back to our lights on, and we're going to go to the next slide. And I won't do the links. Thankfully, I'm glad that I kept all the videos as a backup because this will be helpful. So here's another example of following a child's lead. You'll be able to see that there's an activity that's on the desk. There are things that are on the desk, and we are doing nothing about them because he is not motivated by the activity that I brought in. Instead, he's motivated by something very different. And so this is a child who does have verbal communication. However, it's not always functional. And so you'll be able to see from this little blurb.
No. No. Fast. Faster.
So you'll see from that he was really motivated by tickles at that point. And so I was like, okay, from tickles, okay, that's our activity. What can I do? We can do go and stop. This is a child who has go and stop verbally. You can understand that. You can understand it from an intelligibility standpoint. And I want to enrich his language that much more. So from tickling, ooh, I could have them go fast and slow, and that's going to give a big reaction. And so then he started to add on the ER and the EST. And that was something that was really exciting and motivating for him. So now modeling communication within daily routines. So anyone who knows me, I talk a lot to myself. And the reason that I do is I'm practicing. And I am practicing that parallel talk because our kids are observing all of our interactions. They're observing the way that we're communicating, and then they're modeling off of that, or they're imitating from that. And so we want to make sure that we're doing that when we're interacting with our kids, when we're interacting side by side, and when we're using the AAC devices as well. Also remember scaffolding and remember that zones of proximal development. The same goes for when we're using our utterance size. If we have a child who is just communicating using 1 to 2 words, and then we go and communicate to them using a paragraph, that's going to be something that's outside of their zone of proximal development. So we want to make sure that we are maybe using 3 to 5 words outside of that, or providing them still with a language-rich model, just not very large. The other thing is singing. And so you heard me with singing, put our socks on. You can choose any melody. Trust me, they don't care. The sillier, the better. And you can put any words to it. And that's something that's going to be functional for then going through a routine and being able to have it be memorable for them. You want to make sure that you're pausing. You're giving them that space. You're using visuals. So you're providing them with additional AAC. So then that way they can either imitate your sign, or they can point to a picture, or they can use their AAC device. You can also use visuals with an AAC device as well. That's completely fine, because that's something that they might use for their daily schedule, and then their AAC device or their high-tech device is something that they're using for communication. They have to be able to communicate about their schedule. That's just something that is part of our everyday routines. And then again, remember to have fun. So I use this. This is something off of Realize Language. It's one of the data collecting systems that we can use for high-tech devices. And the reason that I have this on here is that look at the words that are very big. The words that are big are the words that are used the most frequently, and those words don't necessarily make all the most sense. However, they're motivating for a child when they're first using their device. We have animal noises on here. We have lots of animal noises, cluck, ba, meow, ribbit. There are things that are really silly and that are motivating for them to start to realize that, okay, this is a communication tool and this is something that I can ask. We also see words in there like no, we see cheeseburger, we see your. We're seeing words that are probably being modeled by the caregiver or their therapist, but they're providing the child with that additional inputs. And then that way, maybe they might go, no, ba, meow. And so they want to hear a cat sound instead of the sheep sound. Again, with singing and building communication, you can still use people's songs. You can still use nursery rhymes using AAC, thinking about the words that are being repetitive in that and being able to build from there. So using words like on, or if you're doing Old MacDonald had a farm, you might do the animals. And so that might be something that's more fringe, where you're modeling all of the farm animals that are on there and you're teaching where the animal sounds are. Or you might be monkeys jumping on the bed or monkeys jumping on the trampoline. And so you're using on and then off, thinking of these words that are going to be highly repetitive, but are going to be able to be used in different environments. Again, waiting. So you heard me doing the socks on for the second time you heard me doing that again, and I'm pausing. I'm waiting to see what is she going to do? How is she going to fill in that blank? And do they want me to continue, or are they really wanting me to stop? And because I paused, it gave them the space to walk away. The same goes with our daily activities. So when you're first starting with a device or when you're first starting with a language communication system, you want to pick a daily activity and then think of, okay, what are 1 to 3 words that I could implement within this? When is something that I am going to be able to use the device and feel confident in that, and then start to familiarize yourself with using those words, start to use them a little bit more naturally, so that way then you're able to model it for your child. You then can start to build that into other activities, and you want to make sure that, again, you're still observing, you're waiting, you're listening to see how is your child interacting with the device, how are they interacting with you once you're modeling for them. So again, you're continuing to do this scaffolding kind of dance and back and forth of, okay, I'm going to do something, I'm going to wait, I'm going to watch, how are you reacting? And now I'm going to either build on it, or maybe I'm going to take a step back because that was too much. So you'll see here that we are cleaning up. How many people are cleaning up? We have to sometimes manipulate our environment. And so from here, you'll see we had a little kitchen set out. She had walked away from me because she was done. I paused and she was like, yep, that's my cue to leave. And so I said, wait, we have to clean up our items. And so what I did was start to then use the word open. Now, this little girl, it's the same girl from previously. She does have some sign, although the sign is not always functional, and she relies on somebody to provide her with a cue. And so you will see her sign here as well. So I want you to notice my reaction.
Everybody, everywhere, clean up. Should we open? Open. Yay! Uh-oh. Open. Oh. Hooray! Uh-oh. Open. I see you signing. Open. Nice work. Uh-oh. Read. Open. Good girl. You're signing open too. Nice work. I like how you're doing that.
So you'll see we had a lot of repetition in there. I was manipulating the environment. So I was closing the bag each time. Yes, she probably got a little bit of frustration with me, but then that's allowing her to open each time. Sometimes she's signing it and I'm acknowledging that. I'm still modeling for her and I'm still using the verbal output of saying open. And so you want to make sure that you're setting up and you're using your environment. So deciding when and where you want to start using the device. These are things that are really important to think about as a family unit, to talk with your therapy team, so that that way you're picking a time when the environment around you is less distracting and that you can have that direct interaction with your child. While yes, we're following their lead, we also don't want them to be going off and playing with somebody else or doing something else when we're trying to introduce a new skill, because that's not necessarily going to capture their attention as well as if our environment is really plain. We want to know the words that we want to target and know where they're located and ensure that the activity has multiple opportunities for repetition. You can use visuals, so using the AAC, you can have your own core board or own AAC next to you if you think that that's something that would be beneficial for providing that additional visual. And then start to place visuals around your home to encourage generalization and additional turn taking and modeling. So for a child that was really motivated by the lights and having on and off, what I might do is I might suggest, to the family of taking a picture of what their button would look like and on, and having that at the top of the light switch, and then the picture of off and having that at the bottom. So then that way it's giving the parent a visual cue of, okay, oh, I've got a model on when I'm turning the light on. I've got a model off when I'm turning the light off. And so it's the same thing, as well as giving the child a cue and helping them really integrate that use of language. This is another thing with when we were talking about accessibility and moving the devices around. Sometimes I'll use a visual to support within the clinic, or I'll usually use a visual at home of where should our talker live, helping the child understand that, okay, yes, this is an extension of me, but every time I move, like if I move over to get my cup and then come back, I don't always have to have it with me, but I have to understand where exactly is it living if I do need to reference it. And so using some kind of placemat or visual is something that's really beneficial. This is just an example. I'm going to skip over this video because it's similar of what we were talking about with on, but then we were in something that was more of a structured environment and we were able to expand from on. She started to imitate that and I started to model what and down. I was not expecting her to understand the concept of what, but I'm starting to expand that language of what's this? What's that? And showing her her shoe and so showing her her sock. And then down, we were pulling her socks down over her AFOs. So then something for examples. So for like daily activities, I get a lot of families who are like, they love watching videos on their iPad and that's something that they just kind of go off to and we just kind of lose them. They're not necessarily engaged with us. Okay, that's a way that you can start to incorporate yourself into what their play is. Again, they might become a little bit upset at first, but as soon as they understand that if I keep hitting play, you're going to play it, you're going to let me watch it that much longer, I'm going to keep hitting play. So you can use play or stop or up and down to turn the volume up, to turn the volume down. Earlier today I was using me. And so I was selfishly taking the iPad away and I was going, me, I want it, it's my turn. And then they had to respond to then get it back. And each time they were getting it back and they become motivated by that. That is something that they're motivated to work for. And so therefore they're going to watch you, they're going to model or imitate what you're modeling in terms of that communication. The other one is snack time. This is the reason why I typically like to suggest it, is you're sitting at a table. It's usually a little bit more structured than it is when you're playing on the floor, and you're able to have the device in a specific spot. You're able to have your snack. I would suggest having it in some kind of closed container. So then that way you have to model open and opening the container to then get one out. If they request for more, you can always shake it and go, yeah, there's more inside. We need to get more. Let's open, and then open the Ziploc bag or open the container. So then that way they're able to get more. And then we're eating and we're making sounds when we're eating and we're having fun and starting to model that. You might have a doll that's with you that's also eating as well. And so you're generalizing the vocabulary that you would typically be using but you're also using it on the device. And so something that's available for you guys, and I know that we're kind of over time a little bit, something that's available for you guys on the slides is this activity. So thinking of a core word, or you can think of a motivating activity that your kid or AAC user is really fascinated by, and what are some words that you can start modeling for. Once you start to get in the routine of, okay, they really like music, I can turn music on, off, up, and down. Then, oh wait, I can turn lights on and off. Oh, I can turn the volume on the TV up and down. I can turn the temperature in the car, the fan up and down. Lots of these things that cause and effect. And all of a sudden you've just been modeling 4 words, but you've used it across so many different environments. And that's really when our kids are going to start to generalize and use their language that much more. So I hope from this, I know that it's probably the end of a long night for a lot of you guys, but the takeaway is that you feel more confident in making a plan for using an AAC device. You are not afraid of using an AAC device. I get this a lot. I know that if they're a high-tech piece of equipment, it is an expensive piece of equipment, but it's something that is meant to be used and loved. And then you have an amazing support team that's able to provide you with additional support in terms of any kind of technical issues, depending on the device that you have. Use visuals and supports to assist you. Do not be afraid just because you have the device that you can't use anything else. There are many, many Facebook groups out there. Feel free to reach out if you are looking for a specific group in mind. There's parent groups, there's therapist groups, there are product groups. There's a lot of things that are sharing a lot of different ideas of how to use the devices in different environments. Remember that their device must always be accessible to them, and that you can always reach out to your child's speech therapist, and just to have fun. This is something that feels really daunting, and sometimes for things that feel really daunting, we're less likely to do them. But if you go in with just thinking that I'm going to model 1 word and we're just going to have fun and I'm just going to interact with my child, that's a lot more beneficial than just having the device sit there. So. And this is my contact information for anybody that might need it. And that's it.